Thank you everyone for joining us today at the Go Virtual Career Pathways Conference. I'm Carrie Lane from the San Diego County Office of Education, and I will be helping to moderate as well as presenting for this conference. We ask that all attendees keep yourself muted unless you have any needs during the presentation, but feel free to use the chat if you have any questions throughout the presentation. Leo Cole is on as well from the San Diego County Office of Education, and she is going to be helping to monitor the chat. So I am now going to start my presentation, Easy Tips and Tools for Accessibility. All right, so I want to get started by talking about some things to consider, some guidelines for accessibility. And I'm an instructional technology specialist at the San Diego County Office of Education. Before working at the county office, I taught 3rd and 6th grade for 6 years. And I've become really passionate about helping people to design accessible and high quality curriculum and content. So today we're going to go over some guidelines for creating accessible content. And then we're going to look at some settings and also some Chrome extensions for accessibility. And our learning outcomes for today are to identify why creating accessible content is important, as well as to explore some common accessibility issues and how to responsibly adapt to those. And then we'll also explore those Chrome tools, extensions, and settings for accessibility. And everything that we're talking about today is just general and broad information. It isn't legal advice. And do know that there are so many Chrome apps out there for accessibility. So these are just a few you can try out. Web accessibility is incredibly important. Reasons for this: disabilities can create roadblocks for employment, inclusion, and also independence. 8.5% of the population, according to WebAIM, has a computer disability, meaning that they have a hard time with using the computer based on visual or other impairments that block them from using it. But the web does offer access to information and new ways of communicating for people who have disabilities. And even small modifications, such as the ones we'll talk about today, can help make the web accessible to everyone. Additionally, changes that are made for people with disabilities can also help people without disabilities. So a lot of the things we'll talk about today, such as captioning or alternative text, that can help if you are in a coffee shop and it's loud, or perhaps you need a screen reader because you're doing something else and can't be looking at your screen. So keep that in mind as well. And let's dive into some accessible content considerations and guidelines. First, highly recommend that you create simple and clear content. The longer and more confusing your content, the harder it will be for people with disabilities and all of your students, your users, to understand it. Additionally, when you're creating documents, it's really important to break it up into headings, and we'll go over how to do that in Microsoft Word so that you can create a structure that a screen reader can use, but also so that students can use to help them see what information is nested under other information. If you can, use multiple formats to display your concepts. And when I say this, it's because if somebody is unable to learn based on a certain format, they might strive to learn some other format that you can do instead. So the more formats you can reach learners with, the better. When you're creating documents or PowerPoints or pictures or anything that you're doing, you need to make sure that there's a contrast level between your background and also your text. So if students and users can't discern between the two, that's going to make it inaccessible, even if you have the greatest content out there. Consider using simple transitions in slideshows and non-distracting animations. Animations and transitions can be hard, especially for people who have vestibular diseases and also epilepsy. So you want to consider making those as subtle as possible. Additionally, in terms of using fonts, it's recommended to use sans serif fonts for students with disabilities, such as Arial and Calibri. Those help to make an easy reading experience for users. And this one is just think about for yourself as well. Using 12-point font for documents and 18-point font or larger for presentations is really helpful to ensure that people can actually see your content. And consider adding header rows and column headings when you're adding tables. This will alert screen readers of what the most important headings and columns are. So those were just some general guidelines. And as I mentioned before, Leo is in the chat and you can feel free to put any questions that you have in that chat and I will be happy to answer them. But now what I want to do is I want to break into how you can use specific programs for accessibility. So we're going to look at Office 365 right now, and I want to preview for you the accessibility checker. So in Office 365, there's an accessibility checker that will go through a lot of those things that I mentioned before and help you actually make your documents accessible. And we'll also look at how to create alt text in Office 365, how to create hyperlink text, and how to look at logical reading order. The other thing that I want to demo for you in Word, which we're going to jump into in a second, is how to use headings and styles. So I'm going to pull up just a sample Word document. And within the sample Word document, I want to point out this styles menu. And you'll notice here that there's normal text. This is going to be the text that any of your paragraphs will have. But if you're titling a document, you either want to call it the title, or if you just start with your headers, important information, you can put heading 1. Heading 2 would go underneath heading 1. So if you're creating a document, it's important that you create that structure for students and other users to be able to navigate through. And so all you need to do is use headings and then styles up here. And I also want to dive now into a PowerPoint to demo the accessibility checker. So this is just a PowerPoint that we have, and this is one that a sample of one that does not have the accessibility already checked. So from PowerPoint, if you go to the Review tab and you go to Check Accessibility, it pops up a menu that will tell you all of the different accessibility errors you have in your PowerPoint or your document. This is in all of those Word products. And so it'll tell you if you're missing alternative text, and you can use the drop down to either add a description or if it's maybe a decorative element, something that doesn't need a description, you can mark it as decorative. And you would go through and you would check all of these images. And the reason that images will need an alternative text is because if a user is unable to see an image, then you want to make sure that there is a description that a screen reader can read that will go over what that is. And make sure that the content is meaningful. So you don't need to use words like click here or spacer or logo or anything like that. You want descriptive information that's going to tell somebody who can't see the picture what the picture actually shows. Additionally, you'll notice that the accessibility checker will tell me if I'm missing a slide title. Slide titles tell screen readers that this is the important title of the slide. So if you don't have a slide title, you'll need to set one. And so from the drop down, you'll be able to set a slide title. So you can set a slide title that's already there, you can add one, or you can add a hidden slide title. Additionally, you'll get some warnings. So these aren't as severe as errors, but they're things to keep in mind. So one thing that you want to make sure of is that your reading order is accurate. So when the screen reader reads it, you want to make sure that it's reading the header first, and then the text, and then seeing the pictures. So it'll tell you to check the reading order of your slides. And so you go to this down arrow and you verify your object order. And from there, you just drag and drop. So you want the title first, that's correct. Then you want the text. And then maybe you wanted the picture before the slide number. So you can drag and drop it into the order that you want. And it'll also tell you things like contrast, if there are any contrast errors, duplicate slide titles. So this is really, really useful for checking accessibility. And if you just happen to want to put in alt text without actually going ahead and doing the accessibility checker, you can right click into a picture and go to edit alt text. And that will allow you to add alt text. And then the other thing that you can do, if you wanted to add in links, it's really important when you're linking to a long link. For example, this one won't be so long just because off the top of my head, it's not such a long one. But a screen reader will read all of the characters in a link. So if it's a 70 character link, it will read all of those. And that's going to be really frustrating for someone who's using a screen reader. So instead, what you can do is you can highlight and right click. If you go to link, you can change the display text. So this will be the text that the screen reader reads to something more meaningful. And you don't need to say link to because the screen reader will say that, but instead you could say where that link is actually going to, and then keep the address the same. So those are some considerations for Office 365. I want to take a pause and see if anyone had any questions to put in the chat. Doesn't look like there are any yet. No? Okay. Great. So let's move in now to the immersive reader, which I will demo in a second. And then after we go into the immersive reader, we'll also go into some Google accessibility. So I do want to talk to you a little bit about the immersive reader, which is a Microsoft product that is in Word, OneNote, Microsoft PowerPoint, and plenty of their other apps. And what this does is it helps students to understand text. So it gives them adjustable text to speech, a picture dictionary, translation features, and we're going to look at that right now. And then we'll also be looking at some things for Google accessibility, including the fact that there's a tools menu that has accessibility settings, and that will allow users to turn on screen reader support and screen magnifying support. And then we'll look at also how to go ahead and add alt text and adjust links in Google. And we'll also look at a slide captioning feature in Google Slides. So let's jump into the web. And from here, I want to demo for you the immersive reader. So I just have some sample text to demo this for you. And I'm going to go to View, because this is where the immersive reader is housed. And this is within Microsoft and all of the different programs. And what the immersive reader will do is it's going to adjust how the page text is displayed for optimal user experience. And so one of the things you can do, there's a play button, and you can play the words out loud. And I'm going to unplug my microphone so you can hear it from my computer. And so with that, you can go ahead and you can play whatever text is on the page aloud. You can also go in and adjust voice settings so you can make it slower or faster. Some of us learn better when we have a really fast speed that's reading to us, and some of us do better when it's slowed down a bit. Additionally, you can change the voice from female to male or male to female. If you go to text preferences up at the top, you'll be able to adjust the text size. So for students who have a visual impairment, it might be helpful to have bigger text. Otherwise, you can make it smaller if you want to fit more on a page. You can also increase the spacing between lines and letters. And this is especially useful if you have students with dyslexia who maybe are using reading rulers. You can increase that spacing so that they can have a place to put the reading ruler or to focus on chunks of text at once. Additionally, Microsoft actually did research on the most accessible fonts for students with dyslexia, visual impairments, and Calibri is one of those. Comic Sans is actually found to be one of the best fonts for students with dyslexia, so that's an option as well. And then they created their own font called Sitka, which is supposed to also be good for students with visual impairments. Students can change the themes. So some students do better with a high contrast theme, something like this. So you can do that. Other students might do better just with a traditional background. And there are a ton of themes and colors to choose from based on what students' contrast needs are. Then I mentioned before that I taught middle school English for a few years, and this tool, the grammar options tool, is something that I wish had existed when I was teaching middle school English, because you can mark the syllables in different words, and you can also go ahead and label parts of speech. So if you want students to be able to recognize the nouns or the verbs, the adjectives, the adverbs, you can set that up for students as well. And if you go to reading preferences, you can turn on line focus. So again, I mentioned a reading ruler. If somebody maybe has dyslexia, you can turn on a reading ruler. This is also useful if students have trouble with attention and you want them to just focus on one line or a couple of lines at a time. You can turn on a picture dictionary. So when you click into a word, it'll pop up with a picture of it. And this is really useful for English language learners. And also it will have a little voice that reads out the word. And you'll notice here that it also reads it in a different language. And the reason for that is because Immersive Reader also has translation features. So you can translate any of your text into all of these different languages. And so once you've done that, and we'll just go with Italian since that was the one, you can do it by word and it'll translate word by word, or you can translate the full document and it will read.
Testo della mia pagina.
And if after you've done that, you want to go to the original language, you can do that. You can also at any point just go back to your general OneNote or Microsoft Word or Microsoft PowerPoint. So that is the Immersive Reader. And I'm going to just pause to see if anyone had any questions about this. Okay, so is this built into Google Suite? So Christopher, your question, this one is actually part of Microsoft. So it's in any of the Microsoft products or many of the Microsoft products, and it's free within those products. So as long as you have Microsoft Word or Microsoft OneNote, also, if you have Microsoft PowerPoint, it'll be in there. There is also a Google extension that mirrors this, and we're going to talk a little more about extensions later. It's called the the Immersive Reader extension, but it's not put out by Microsoft itself. So I'm not exactly sure how close to the actual product it is. But now we are going to jump into Google. And Google honestly has a lot of the same capabilities in terms of putting in alt text and also links. So I just want to show you how you would do that in a Google Doc first. So I put here this very long link, and as I mentioned, a screen reader will read all of those characters. So that's not going to be great for the user experience. So instead, we can highlight and right click and go to link. And from here, once we have a link, we can either go to the link icon here and we can change the text to something more user friendly. So this one I think went to, I think it was an image of a dog. So we would just put, and this way users know because it'll say link to on the screen reader itself. It'll say link to white dog in grass. And so that way they know what they're seeing and what they're going to. And in terms of pictures, all you have to do is right click And Google Docs has an alt text section as well. And with Google Docs, it's slightly different than Microsoft Word, which only has one box. Google Docs allows you to put a title and then a longer description if you want to give more meaningful description to your alternative text. So, and then when you hit OK, you've made sure that as a screen reader gets to this image, it will say image of dog in green or on green grass, white dog on green grass. And so this way you're providing a really good experience for users using a screen reader. The other thing I wanted to show you is under the tools menu in any of the Google tools, you can go to accessibility settings and you can turn on a screen reader support. You can turn on Braille support, and you can also turn on screen magnifier support. So if you have external screen magnifiers or screen readers, you can use those as well. And within PowerPoint, and we'll go into this in just a second, you can also do something with captioning for your students as you do live presentations. I do see there's a question in the chat. So Emily asked, do you recommend doing this as a best practice or just if we know someone we work with is using a screen reader? So Emily, if you can, I definitely recommend doing this as a best practice because as I mentioned, there are times where even when people don't have any kind of disability, they're maybe in a location where they can't, look at the screen and they're having it read to them by a reading software, or some of the ones we'll talk about, like with the captioning. Think about when you watch TV, sometimes even if you can hear a captioning on top of it or subtitles on top of it is actually really useful. And so I would highly recommend always trying to add in alt text and meaningful hyperlink text, especially even the hyperlink text. Think of when you're looking at a really big document with a ton of cumbersome links, it's overwhelming for users, whether they have disabilities or not. So even just shortening those links and making them more meaningful. And some of the guidelines that we always like to say is think if you couldn't actually use a picture, how would you describe it? That way you're making sure to give all of your users the experience that they need, whether they can see it or not. And that could be whether they have a disability or they're just not able to look at that exact time. So I would recommend it if you can. And now what I want to do is I do want to show you in Google Slides a feature for accessibility. And as I mentioned, there's that tools accessibility settings. So now you'll notice I have an accessibility menu that allows me to kind of access some accessibility options as well here. And then within slides, what I love about it is if you go to a presentation, it'll pop up my presentation with a bar at the bottom, which it's not doing yet. So let me go out of that. We'll try going to it in a different way. I wonder if oh, there it is. Okay. So you'll notice at the bottom, there are lots of features within Google Slides, and a lot of them are very useful for teaching and making it engaging as well. But today, since we're focusing on accessibility, what I want to point out is this captioning tool. So as you are presenting a slideshow, just to make sure that users are all able to understand your content, you can go to this captions button. And as you talk, it will do live captions of whatever you are saying. And of course, you need to articulate as best you can. And also, if you can, try to make sure to check as you go for accessibility. But it's a really great tool just to make sure that everyone is able to both see and hear your presentation. So I wanted to point that out too. And for those of you who are actually looking at the words right now, you'll notice that it's pretty spot on. Even when I said 2 versus 2, it gets it right most of the time. So it's good to keep an eye out and make sure it's accurate, but it's also pretty good. Okay, I see a question from Linda in the chat that says, will you receive a copy of this PowerPoint and recording? I am recording, and we will be sharing that with the Go Virtual organizers. So I believe you will have an option to access the recording, and the PowerPoint is on the SCED. It's linked in a Google Slides and also in PowerPoint. And if for some reason you have a hard time accessing that, I have my contact information and I'll share it again toward the end. And you can ask me and I'd be happy to give you slides and the PowerPoint. But the resources are up on SCED as well for the session. All right, let's jump back in. And I want to go now into some things to think about for website accessibility. And you may or may not be creating websites and using websites quite frequently, but I did want to point out just some things to think about in terms of website accessibility if you are managing or using websites. And this includes if you have your own teacher site, a Google site maybe, or any kind of site that you might have created, a Wix, a Weebly, all of those. If you have one of those, some things to keep in mind. And these, a lot of them are the same as what we talked about before, but you always want to make sure there's good contrast between the background of your page and the text on your page. Also, when you have a website, each of the pages should have a unique title. Same reason as you would title your documents, because you want to make sure that a screen reader is going to tell the user of what page each one is so that they know where to navigate to. This is especially important within website accessibility. A lot of times designers will design a website using tables to help with layout. This can be a little bit difficult for people using a screen reader, so you want to make sure that your tables have headers designated and are well structured and easy to understand. Also, and this one is really important, do not rely on color, location, or sound alone to convey information. So for example, if you say click on the red box, but someone can't see red, maybe they're colorblind or they have a visual impairment, they won't know where to click. If you say something like, when you hear the bell, click on this. If somebody can't hear, then they won't know when or how to do something. So try to make sure that you use multiple different ways to convey important information. And we talked about alt text, but alt text should always be meaningful. And if for some reason your picture that you're putting in doesn't need alt text, you can put alt equals and then 2 sets of quotation marks. And that means that it's a decorative image that doesn't need alt text. And then I mentioned this before, but screen readers will already say things like map of, picture of, link to. So you don't need to say those again as you put in your alt text. And things like click here or this link or something that would be, generic and won't really tell people what's going on. If you have 5 click here's, it's going to be really confusing for someone who can't actually see the content. And as I mentioned before, if you couldn't use a picture, think about what text you would use instead. And this is a great way to guide you as you create alt text for your links, for your pictures, even for headings if you have a picture-based heading. I see that there's someone who said that I'm muted. So if anyone else is having a hard time hearing me, no? Okay. Okay, great. Well, if that happens again, please just let me know in the chat and I will make sure to fix that. And now I do want to show you something called Wave Web Aim, which is a tool you can use to check the accessibility of websites. So, of course, if you have your own website, you would just enter the URL for that. But here, we'll just do a generic one of Google. And once you do that, it's going to come up and it's going to tell you all of the different errors. And you'll see it's only 3. There are a lot of little parts, and the purple and the green are just fine, but the red is what you need to be worried about. And you can look at what the errors are. So even within the Google website, there are 2 pictures that are missing alternative text. There are a couple of errors where there's low contrast, probably when there's a blue background and some white text. And then they have some alerts. And so as you're putting together a website for your students, you can always check and make sure that it's accessible using the Wave tool. All right. And then let's jump in now, just some considerations for social media. When you're creating a social media post, which some of you may do for your students or your users, if you have photos, create a tag for them or add that alt text to them. And if you can't do that, make sure that you're describing the photo in the post itself so that users know what the photo is of. Additionally, if you have any videos in your post, those need to be captioned. And if you're posting a picture of something that has information, that's great, but because it's a picture, a screen reader won't be able to read that information. So what you want to do is make sure that the information is still conveyed in the post too, or that you link to the information itself in the post. And if you can, avoid using abbreviations or language that might be difficult to understand for a screen reader. And the other one that I want to touch on is videos. And so videos do require time synchronized captions, and this is so that users who can't hear the video can still read what's going on. And there are lots of captioning services out there, and depending if you have paid subscription to a lot of programs, they have captions as well. But if you need a free one, you can always use YouTube. They do have a free captioning service. It's just really important to check those captions for accuracy. So within the YouTube studio, you can go in and actually check captions for accuracy. And if we have time at the end, I do want to make sure to get through all of the other tools, but if we have time at the end, I'll give you a quick demo of how to use the YouTube's captioning service too. And then this slide right here is a really helpful go-to. And as I mentioned, I will be sharing this in the Sched, or it's already shared in the Sched schedule for you. But this slide is really useful because it tells you all the different things that you can do for different disability types. So if you know that you're having a user who has visual disabilities, the hyperlink text, the alt text, all of that is really useful. Additionally, as we mentioned with social media posts, try not to put text inside an image because then it won't be read by a screen reader. And if you do put text inside an image, make sure that you put that in the alt text for that image. Make sure that contrast and font size is appropriate, check the reading order. And then we touched on avoid using colors and shapes and sizes and visual information to convey what you're trying to say. If you can, create audio descriptions of video content and use descriptive page titles. For auditory disabilities, if you can provide text transcripts, that's really useful. Synchronized captions are incredibly important, and avoiding instructions based on sounds. For motor disabilities, make sure when you're actually testing out your websites, especially, but sometimes your content too, make sure that people can actually navigate through it without having to click on a mouse. So can they do it with keyboard shortcuts and keys? That's important. Additionally, if you can, give users control over timing and movement so that things don't go too quickly for them. If you have students with learning disabilities, using those headings and titles and subtitles is very helpful to help give them a structure that they can use as they're navigating through a document. Creating simple and easy to use language is really important as well. The simpler your language is, the more students will be able to understand. Making sure that you have logical navigation and reading order for your content. If you can, use larger text for whatever you're conveying, and try to avoid long lines. So the longer a line, the more easy it is to get distracted as you read it. So if you can make lines shorter, that's great. And for students who might have epilepsy, avoid content that flashes more than 3 times per second. This can cause seizures in students, and avoid unnecessary PowerPoint transitions and animations. All right, I want to jump into the chat really quickly. That ends the first portion of our session, which is really those tips for creating accessible content. And now I want to jump into some Chrome tools and settings that might be useful for either you or for your users. So I'll just give it a minute to see if anyone had any questions, and then we'll move into Chrome settings. All right. I don't see any questions in the chat, so I'm going to move on. And the first thing I want to point out is the Chrome browser. So within the Chrome browser itself, it has certain settings that you can put forth to help with the user accessibility experience. The first one is by going to the three dot icon. And there you can adjust the zoom of a page. So at any point, you can zoom in to help make it larger and more readable, or you can zoom out. And this might be useful to help you with clarity if you need things to be smaller or bigger. And then you can also adjust the appearance settings by going to the settings button. And from settings, you're going to scroll down until you see appearance. And here, there are a few different things that you can change. So one is you can do a pop-out window and go to the Chrome Web Store, which has tons of themes for your Chrome browser. And some of these, for example, the high contrast colorful, are specifically meant to help with people who have a difficult time discerning with low contrast. So this will create high contrast for users. And then there are tons of others to customize as well. Additionally, you can decide to change the font size. So we talked a little bit about the zoom, but maybe you just want to have all the time large or very large font. You can absolutely set that as well. And this is going to change all of your font from then on to be very large. You can go in and you can customize your fonts. And so we mentioned the sans serif fonts are really good for students with disabilities. So you can put forth any of these sans serif fonts. And I mentioned before also for dyslexia, you could use the Comic Sans font. So you could look for that. And there are just a ton of different fonts and font sizes you can adjust. And you can adjust the page zoom permanently. And so if you do something like this, instead of having to go back in all the time and adjust that zoom, you can just do it to the zoom you like and it'll customize it until you change it again. So for now, I just want to leave mine the same so that I can demo all the extensions that we're going to talk about in a general browser, but you can go back and change them at any point. And now I want to talk about some extensions for accessibility. And Chrome extensions are software programs that are added to Google Chrome to customize browsing experiences based on needs and preferences. And so in this case today, we're going to talk about ones that can help users with accessibility, but there are ones to help with productivity, ones to help with relaxation. There are so many out there. So we're just touching on a few today. And to get to a Chrome extension, you would go to the Chrome Web Store, which is this apps button here, and then Web Store. And then you type in the app that you're looking for. And for now, I'm just going to type in one that I know I'm going to discuss today. And then you click into it and you would hit add to Chrome, and then it'll be in this puzzle piece icon. And that's where you'll find those extensions. So let's demo just a few of these. And I also want to mention there are going to be a couple that I don't demo, mostly because they are not friendly for presentations when you demo them. But I do want to point out there's one called the ChromeVox screen reader. So if you have a user who needs a screen reader, Chrome has its own screen reader called ChromeVox, and it will read everything in the Chrome window. The reason I don't want to demo this is because it'll talk over me throughout my whole presentation. And the other one that I want to talk about today that I'm not going to demo is called Move It, which is a movement extension. And so if you have students who have issues with attention or even just general students or yourself, and you need movement breaks to help keep you focused, there is an app or an extension on Chrome called Move It. And this is going to create movement prompts for your students that pop up intermittently and gives them something to do throughout the different points in the day. So for example, you might have it pop up every 30 minutes, and it's just a quick 30-second movement prompt, such as do a 30-second plank or do 5 jumping jacks, but it helps to give you a little bit of a break and also to get you active. So those are the ones we're not going to demo, and that I'm not going to demo this one because I don't want it to pop up with a movement prompt in the middle of my presentation. Thanks, Leo. I see that. So the ones I do want to demo for you, and I'm going to pull up just a quick article so I can demo some of these. We have something called the Read Aloud text-to-speech extension. So this one, like the immersive reader, will read an article aloud to students.
About the author. Likes writing code and about the idea.
And so as you can hear, you are able to play and stop, and you can move forward and backward in your article. Additionally, you can also increase the font size, decrease the font size, and make the window bigger and smaller. So that one's really useful. The next one I want to demo for you is called Internet Abridged, which is going to make a summary of a longer article and put it in a pop-up window. And so as you can see, I have this long article that might distract my students as they're reading, especially because it has lots of pictures and images. And so here it just does a little quick summary in a pop-up. So maybe I have my students read the summary and then go back and focus in on the article just to give them a quick preview and summary first. Another really useful extension for readability is called Print Friendly and PDF. What this does is it takes an article and it's going to turn it into a different format that allows you to actually customize it. So maybe I don't want all the text that's in there to go to my students. I can go through the trash icon and delete text from the article. I can also go in and delete pictures from my article. And you'll notice it also kind of changes it so there aren't any more real ads or anything other than the content itself and the images. And so I can customize this for my students as much as I want. And then when I'm done, I can save it as a PDF, or I can print it and then give it to my students. Okay. So that's a really nice one as well. Also, we have one called Voice Note. So if students have a hard time with typing, there's a dictation notepad that they can speak into and it'll type for them, very similar to how you saw with Google Slides. You can do captioning. I also want to show you Tab Cloud, which is a really nice one for organization. This might be better for older students because what it does is it saves all of the tabs that are open on your computer screen and you name them. So this could be my accessibility training. And then once you save this, and you'll need to log in with this, so hopefully. Perfect. So now when I go to my Tab Cloud, you'll see I have all these saved sessions. And it's not going to work for me right now. Basically, oh, there it is. So it'll save my sessions. And then all I have to do is hit the plus sign and it'll open up all of those tabs for me. So this is a great way if you have lots of different tabs open to help your students keep them safe and organized and then relaunch. So it'll launch all of those at once. Okay. And the last one that I want to preview from here is the click-free browsing extension. which is this one right here. And from here, this is great for students who can't click into a mouse. What it does is it creates these little navigation options on the sidebar. And just by hovering over those navigation options, so I'm not clicking, it'll move you to the bottom of the page. You can move back up to the top of the page. It'll help students to scroll slowly, and then they can go back and forth between previous pages. Additionally, any links that they see, they'll be able to click and open that link. So that's click-free browsing, great for students who maybe are unable to click into a mouse. And the last one that I want to launch is called @bar. And this is an all-in-one Chrome extension. And what it will do, it has the opportunity to increase the font size. You can change the font settings. You can do a spell check. Additionally, there's a dictionary and word prediction. Just like with Read Aloud, it has text to speech. And then what I really like also, you can change the styles. So you can change text and link colors. And there's a color overlay. So again, kind of like the immersive reader, you can change the way that a page displays to the student or the user. So this is a nice all-in-one toolbar that kind of combines a lot of what we discussed throughout. Okay, so I see there are some questions, and I do want, before we move on to the end of the presentation, to just show you. Sorry, bear with me for 1 second. I saw that there were a few questions about having lists of the different Chrome apps and things like that. So I did want to give you a couple of additional accessibility resources. We have something called the Canvas Catalog, created by the Professional Learning and Technology Research Team, and we have a number of courses that'll be launching in the next few months with accessibility, and those ones have tons of Chrome apps and extensions and a lot more. This was just a quick preview. We're also going to be hosting an accessibility week from the 25th to the 29th, where we'll be doing live sessions on accessibility and also launching a lot of Canvas courses. And we have a couple of different courses where we have lots of resources on accessibility. So this is our Canvas course catalog and all of the different accessibility resources we have. And these are linked in that PowerPoint. We have a whole page of supporting students with disabilities. And we also have a number of archived trainings all about accessibility. So lots and lots of resources for you, and they're all linked. I'm going to put my contact information in the chat, and also we have an evaluation form for you for this session. So I'm going to put that in the chat as well. So that's for the evaluation form. If you all wouldn't mind filling that out, that would be great. And then also, I want to bring up the PowerPoint slide because we have a certificate. I know some of you are taking this for credit or something else for your district. And so here is the certificate for this session coming up in just a second. And if you'd like, you could take a screenshot of this to show that you came to the session and attended it. So I'm going to leave this slide up and then go back into the chat, put my email address, and check and see if I've answered all your questions. If you have any other questions, you can also feel free to ask them. We have about 5 minutes, not even, maybe about 4 minutes. Do you have a simplified Google Doc or form with all the extensions? So I do have the PowerPoint, and then as I mentioned, we have just a ton of different resources that have all sorts of extensions and a lot more than what I presented today. So I can make sure to add a slide into the slide deck on Sked that provides that. And the other thing I'll do really quickly is when I pause my sharing for a second, I will share the link to the Google Slides in the chat too. And Rebecca, the tool was called Print Friendly and PDF. And I think that is it for questions, but like I said, feel free to ask any others. And if you just hold on for a couple more seconds, I will pull up the slide deck for this and put that in the chat. And what I'll do with that is I will also make sure to put in just a simplified Chrome apps and extensions slide that gives you a little bit more information too. Like I said, these are only about 8 out of a ton that we have created. So